is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, I'm Local Asia Tonight's top stories from East Asia. Consternation in Kiev and Europe, but support from Beijing for plans to end war in Ukraine. The Chinese foreign minister at the G20 talking up a window for peace. Canberra sounding a warning to airlines flying between Australia and New Zealand as Chinese warships conduct exercises that could involve live fire in the Tasman Sea. Philippine police arrest more than 450 people at an offshore gaming operator, including officials say 5 Chinese ringleaders. And in business, Nissan's shares jump in Tokyo on reports that the Japanese automaker will seek investment from Tesla. But Elon Musk might pour cold water on that idea.
Japan can be one of the major countries which can support ASEAN's efforts to enhance stability and peace and prosperity in this region.
CNA speaks with Japan's ambassador to ASEAN in an exclusive interview. China's foreign minister says a window for peace is opening up for the Ukraine crisis. Wang Yi was speaking at the G20 meeting in South Africa, stressing Chinese support for all efforts to achieve peace in Ukraine, including a recent agreement by the US and Russia to end the war. China's top diplomat met his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov on the sidelines of the meeting. Mr. Wang says bilateral ties are moving to a, quote, higher level. China's comments coming days after top US and Russian diplomats met in Saudi Arabia on Tuesday and agreed to form teams to negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine. Ukraine itself was not at that meeting. And for more, we're joined by CNA's Deborah Wong in Hong Kong. Deborah, what has China done for its peacemaking efforts so far?
Well, China has maintained neutrality in the war. Foreign Minister Wang Yi most recently addressed members at the G20 foreign ministers meeting on Thursday, saying that China supports all efforts dedicated to peace, including the recent consensus reached between US and Russia. Now, he also said that China is willing to play a constructive role in the crisis resolution. And prior to this, at the Munich Security Conference, Mr. Wang also said it was necessary for all stakeholders in the conflict to be at the table whenever peace talks happen. Now, that includes Europe and Ukraine, which were not included in the recent US and Russia talks. China has not commented on reports that it could set up a peacekeeping force, but analysts say that, China could go the direction of promoting peace summits instead, just like how it actually facilitated the unity deal between Palestinian faction leaders last year, as well as a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran to restore the diplomatic relations back in 2023. Now, on the Gaza issue, China has called for the UN to admit Palestine as a full member and also for a two-state solution for post-conflict governance. So we see China prioritizing the shift to be a peacemaker.
China's moves, though, inviting some criticism from some quarters. How has Beijing defended itself from that criticism?
Well, China has faced criticism from the West on two fronts. Firstly, as Russia's top trading partner, it has been slammed for not doing enough to pressure or condemn Russia into ending the war. Now, China shares a border with Russia, so analysts that I've spoke to said, they wouldn't go so far as to antagonize Russia into antagonizing them economically into ending the war. In fact, Mr. Wang himself has defended China's purchase of gas from Russia, saying that it's necessary to meet the needs of the Chinese people. On the second front, China has also been accused of enabling Russia's military aggression by by Western quarters, saying that, they've actually supplied some critical components for Russia's war machine. Now, China, in turn, has repeatedly denied these allegations, saying that it prudently handles the export of dual-use items according to the law. China has also come up to slam countries, saying that, they should first reflect on the root causes of the crisis if they wish to end the war. Now, some Chinese experts have blamed NATO's expansion as a provocation of the war. They've also, in turn, accused the West for aggravating tensions. So it is really unsurprising that, China wants to position itself as a peacemaker and really is in alignment with its goal to be a responsible major power. Back to you.
Thanks. That's CNA's Deborah Wong there live for us from Hong Kong. Japan's foreign minister pledging to continue support for Ukraine in an address to the G20. Iwaya Takashi stressing mid to long-term assistance that is needed for Kiev's recovery and reconstruction, expressing hope for diplomatic resolution to ongoing war. He raised concerns about the growing military cooperation between Russia and North Korea after Pyongyang deployed thousands of troops to the Kursk front line. Mr. Takashi said the international community faces a major challenge to the rule of law and called on the G20 to play a leading role in international cooperation. He added that Japan will reject any unilateral attempts to use force to alter the status quo, including in the East and South China Seas, where Japan is just one of several countries handling ongoing dispute with China. Earlier, my colleague Yasmin Yonker spoke to Graham Gill. He's Professor Emeritus of Government and International Relations at the University of Sydney. He looked at how US-mediated peace talks between Russia and Ukraine might play out.
What we've seen in the last week or so has been a dramatic escalation in the rhetoric around the Ukraine war. But also what's most remarkable about it is the way in which the American President Donald Trump has seemingly sidelined his NATO allies and decided to go it alone in terms of trying to bring about a peace settlement in that war. But also what he's done has been to put offside not just the Europeans, but also the man that he really needs if any real peace is to be brought about, and that is the Ukrainian president himself, Volodymyr Zelensky. What Trump has done is seemingly said, well, look, I'm going to bring this about regardless of what you, the Europeans, think, and almost regardless of what you, Zelensky, thinks. And unfortunately, what that means is that the likelihood of a peaceful outcome, of an outcome that's going to last, is not very high.
Why else is there antagonism, you think?
Clearly, Trump never likes to be blamed for anything that goes wrong. He's historically Mr. Teflon, and none of the mud seems to stick on him. So he does want a scapegoat if things do go wrong. But also, I think he's got a very strong sense of his own importance, and he believes that Zelensky is a much less important leader than he is. That he called him a sort of a failed politician and a failed comedian. He doesn't see Zelensky as being a serious state leader, I think, and what that means is that he's treated him with contempt, and of course that's not the way to get the sort of agreement that Trump is going to need if he is going to be able to engineer a peace settlement.
And could China play peacemaker even indirectly to end the war in Ukraine? We'll ask that question and put that to Dr. Samir Puri later this hour on East Asia Tonight. He's the director of Center for Global Governance and Security at Chatham House. China says naval drills it's conducting off Australia are safe, legal and in accordance with relevant international laws. This was in response to Australia expressing concern over 3 Chinese warships holding live fire drills off its east coast and warning it will raise the issue with Beijing.
When they do conduct those exercises, obviously notice is provided to ensure that is available to anyone in the area, and that is what Air Services is doing. We do have concerns about the transparency associated with this and the notice, and I certainly will be having a discussion with Foreign Minister Wang about that.
Australia's Air Traffic Control Agency, meanwhile, has advised commercial airlines to reroute flights as a precaution. Several carriers, including Qantas and Jetstar, have temporarily adjusted their routes over the Tasman Sea. It's believed the vessels began exercises without giving notice in international waters about 620 kilometres southeast of Sydney. The Australian Defence Force confirmed yesterday it has been monitoring the three vessels since they were spotted in international waters off Queensland last week before sailing steadily down the coast. And China's military says it warned and drove away 3 Philippine aircraft in the South China Sea after they, quote, illegally intruded into the airspace near the Spratly Islands. It's the latest flare-up in the disputed waters between the two countries. China's Southern Theatre Command accused the Philippines of peddling its illegal claims and warned that the maneuver was, quote, doomed to fail. The incident took place yesterday. At that time, the Philippine Coast Guard said it conducted a maritime domain awareness flight over the Spratly Islands. It spotted more than 50 Chinese maritime militia vessels and a Coast Guard ship. It's unclear if that was the mission that China responded to. The latest incident follows another confrontation earlier this week when the Philippine Coast Guard accused China's Navy of flying dangerously close to its aircraft near Scarborough Shoal. Beijing denied that claim, saying it was the Philippines that violated its sovereignty. Philippine police have arrested more than 450 people in a raid on an offshore gambling operator in Manila. Most of those detained were from the Philippines and China, with several others from Thailand, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia and Taiwan. The country's Anti-Organized Crime Commission chief says 5 Chinese ringleaders were amongst those who were arrested. They may face additional trafficking charges. Initial findings from the raid showed that the site was operating as a scam center, targeting potential victims in China and India with sports betting and investment schemes. It's the latest in a series of busts this year, including one last month that saw some 400 foreigners arrested in Manila. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. banned online gaming operators or POGOs last year amid concerns that they were used as fronts by organized crime groups involved in human trafficking, money laundering and online fraud. Since the ban, police say they have found about 21,000 Chinese nationals running smaller-scale operations across the Philippines. A group of 200 Chinese nationals found in Myanmar scam centers have been flown home to China. Video shows police escorting people off the plane in Nanjing. Chinese state media CCTV says they are suspected of fraud, and another 800 suspects will be escorted back to China in the days ahead. The United Nations says criminal gangs have trafficked hundreds of thousands of people to scam compounds in Myanmar, Cambodia and Laos. They're then forced to work as online scammers. Meanwhile, the families of Malaysian citizens still trapped in scam compounds are calling on China and Thailand to help rescue their loved ones. Some are holding rallies outside the Thai embassy in Bangkok, asking for more to be done. CNA's Melissa Goh with this report.
Malaysian Foreign Minister Muhammad Hassan has lauded the joint operation between China and Thailand to secure the release of thousands of scam victims trapped in the border region of Myawaddy in Myanmar. Now, so far, at least 37 Malaysian victims have been verified, and authorities are trying to expedite the process and bring them home safely.
Negara China telah pun menjalankan suatu usaha untuk memastikan supaya rentas sepadan, terutamanya job scam dan juga judi haram ini, mereka perangi dengan begitu kuat sekali. Dan Thailand telah pun diminta supaya memotong bekalan elektrik dan macam-macam lagi. Dan sebabnya baru-baru ini kita dapat banyak pembebasan.
But many victims' families are anxious. They want authorities to do more to secure the safe return of their loved ones.
希望那个兵会进到去哦。 会进到我的儿子那个园区里面哦，让他自首，他们就有机会回来了。
A similar plea was made outside the Thai embassy in Kuala Lumpur last week, as Bangkok was under pressures from Beijing to take greater responsibility to tackle scam activities at its borders.
Even though cut the electricity, also they will have the, they still manage to generate.
Kalau kita yang Muslim, terpaksalah makan apa yang ada. Semestinya makanan yang ni lah, macam yang babi yang tak halal tu lah.
Now, while Thailand has cut electricity and internet connection in a bid to cripple the operation at scam centres, more needs to be done.
Crucial time right now is to create a data, a call centre or WhatsApp centre which everyone can channel the information, so the government can channel to Thai government. Malaysian government channel to Thai government. Thai government pressure the Karen Buddhist Army or BGF. So more victim, we can rescue more victim.
Meanwhile, a cut in US funding by President Donald Trump has reportedly hampered the work of several humanitarian groups who are assisting the scam victims. Now, the NGOs are urging an ASEAN bloc approach to tackling the scourge that has robbed so many lives, and not to mention billions of dollars in losses. Now, Malaysia has launched a series of outreach programs to educate the public against online fraud and scams. Now, existing laws have also been toughened to penalize those who abuse these social media platforms. Now, network operators have removed thousands of scam-related posts, and a special task force headed by the Home Ministry is working now with ASEANapol to better fight the scourge. Melissa Goh, CNA, Kuala Lumpur.
Still ahead on East Asia tonight, Nissan shares in overdrive after reports that the Japanese company might try to court Tesla. And later, shares in e-commerce titan Alibaba ending the day in the green, adding to a growing sense of optimism over Chinese tech firms. Well, in business news, South Korea's trade ministry has asked Washington to exclude it from planned tariffs on steel and aluminium. Deputy Trade Minister Park Jong-won is said to have emphasized the large-scale contributions that South Korean firms have provided to the U.S. economy. Seoul says the request was made during Mr. Park's trip to Washington this week. South Korea's steel industry has come under pressure from Chinese oversupply and falling global demand. More pressure from threats on tariffs on a broad range of levies on some of Washington's biggest trading partners, amongst them 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium imports. Greater China markets ending the day in the green, with some traders weighing the prospects of more government stimulus. The Chinese premier yesterday pledging more steps to boost consumption. The Shanghai Composite finishing the day with a gain of nearly, 0.85%, and Shenzhen up almost just over 1.8%. But it's the Hang Seng that led the charge, powered by tech gains. Also in focus is Alibaba's stock, with a jump in the double digits in Hong Kong. All this follows an 8% jump as well in its New York listing overnight. The Chinese tech giant beating earnings expectations for the December quarter thanks to strong cloud growth. It's also seen as a winner in China's artificial intelligence race. Morgan Stanley has upgraded MSCI China to equal weight from underweight after judging that it saw slight improvement in the equity risk premium for Chinese stocks. The bank says return on equity trends are improving in favor of China. But when it comes to the macro environment, Morgan Stanley says economists remain below consensus on nominal GDP growth in 2025. It notes that artificial intelligence enthusiasm is also boosting sentiment around e-commerce and internet stocks. The iShares MSCI China ETF is up more than 16% so far this year. More details as another bubble tea chain prepares to tap capital markets to quench a growing thirst for such drinks. Filings show Chinese chain Mixue hopes to raise more than $400 million when it debuts in Hong Kong on the 3rd of March. Reuters earlier reporting Malaysia lowering its target from $1 billion due to less urgency to raise more cash. Malaysia sells low-cost bubble teas and ice cream and has been rapidly expanding in Southeast Asia. It has more than 45,000 stores in China and 11 other countries, placing it ahead of McDonald's and Starbucks in terms of worldwide locations. It has benefited from a bubble tea boom in China that has catapulted several businessmen to billionaire status. Malaysia will be the latest Chinese bubble tea chain to list in Hong Kong, following in the footsteps of others like Good Me and Cha Bai Dao. But analysts say investors are still cautious about investing in a highly competitive industry with a crowded sector and price wars. Inflation in Japan continuing to climb, lifted by rising food and services prices, further increasing the odds of a rate hike by the central bank. The consumer price index rising 4% on year last month, meeting estimates and coming in faster than December's pace, mainly driven by soaring fresh produce prices. Meanwhile, core inflation, excluding fresh food, also ticking up to 3.2%. That's a 19-month high. Analysts say hot inflation readings may prompt the central bank to raise interest rates as upside risks continue to gather momentum. The BOG governor, that's Kazuo Ueda, said yesterday he'd met the Prime Minister for a regular exchange of views on the economy and financial markets. This suggests the government would not object to hiking rates and normalizing policy. Amid increasing bets for further rate hikes by the BOJ, the yen rising to 11-week peaks yesterday, but it's retreating today after a jump in inflation. The Nikkei 225 erasing earlier losses to end the day marginally higher. The Financial Times says Nissan will court Tesla for investment after the collapse of merger talks with Honda. According to this report, the plan was drawn up by a high-level Japanese group that includes former Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga. The group reportedly hopes that Elon Musk's Tesla will become a strategic investor, believing the company is keen to acquire Nissan's plants in the United States. Replying to that story on X, Elon Musk seemed to rebuff the idea, saying that the cybercab production line is like nothing else in the automotive industry. At the same time, Moody's downgraded the credit rating of Nissan to junk after merger plans with Honda were scrapped. Moody's believes Nissan has weak profitability driven by slowing demand for its model portfolio. Nevertheless, Nissan shares jumping as much as 11% in Tokyo before ending the day nearly 9.5% in the green. Well, CATL says it has signed a strategic cooperation memorandum of understanding with Volkswagen. The company says the MOU is to deepen partnership in battery R&D, new materials application and components development. Volkswagen China indicated it aims to collaborate with CATL to create cost-effective battery products. The two companies will also explore initiatives related to battery recycling and swapping. CATL is the world's biggest EV battery supplier and is a key supplier for Tesla. CATL has plants in the US and Europe, but has come under increased scrutiny from US lawmakers. The company recently filed for a secondary listing in Hong Kong. Volkswagen's tie-up with CATL comes as the European carmaker grapples with heightened competition from established EV players in its biggest markets. Still ahead on East Asia tonight, efforts to end the Russia-Ukraine war intensifying, with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi saying that a window for peace is opening up. And how can Beijing play a bigger role in this political resolution? We speak with an expert in just a moment. The headlines on East Asia tonight. Philippine police arrest more than 450 people at an offshore gaming operator, including officials say 5 Chinese ringleaders. Australia's foreign minister sounding a warning to airlines flying between Australia and New Zealand as Chinese warships conduct potentially live fire exercises in the Tasman Sea. China's top diplomat says a window for peace is opening up for the Ukraine crisis, and Beijing supports all efforts to end the war. To look deeper into how China might play peacemaker, we're joined by Dr. Samir Puri. He is director of the Center for Global Governance and Security at Chatham House. He's also the author of Restlessness, the Great Global Rebalancing. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Puri. Now, consternation in Europe and Kiev over the US and Russia drawing more closely together, resetting their strategic relationship. But from China, rather less consternation.
Well, thanks very much for having me. It's amazing, after 3 years of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, things are moving very, very quickly. And I was at the Munich Security Conference just a few days ago, and Wang Yi, the Chinese foreign minister, was also in attendance at the Munich Security Conference. He gave a speech that people didn't necessarily pay a great deal of attention to. But I think this is unfolding in a way that is quite beneficial for China. It certainly also plays to China's general worldview, which is of peace and stability, but with a basis in the hierarchy of larger nations being able to set the terms of that peace and stability. So, as you're saying, that direct relationship that's being rekindled between the USA and Russia is certainly not only beneficial to China, because it will end the Ukraine and Russia conflict in a way that it's beneficial to China, but also because it shows that the big powers of the world get together and decide how to order things.
It may, at least on that front, look beneficial to China, but China has its own challenging relations over the decades with Russia. Now that Russia can find sustenance in the world's largest economy, that's of course the United States, would China be concerned that Russia might now have less need for, I suppose, taking a common position with Beijing?
You raise a really critical question from the Chinese perspective. And just to put our mindset in terms of the people surrounding Donald Trump, one of their big objectives in rebuilding relations with Russia is to break Russia away from China. And Russia and China's partnership has really deepened over the last few years. It is primarily an economic partnership, and a partnership that's based on Russia being one of the world's largest energy producers, and China, of course, being one of the world's largest energy consumers. So there's a huge amount of intertwining between their economies that I don't necessarily think can be immediately undone just because there's a US-Russia rapprochement. So when you've got these on the chessboard, these three players, playing each of them their own game of chess, so it's a multiple-leveled game. I do think that the aspiration that the Americans have of fully pulling the Russians away from the Chinese orbit is probably impossible for one really obvious reason, is that Russia and China are neighbors. They share this enormous land border. And it's not in either of their interests to have some kind of deterioration of relations between them. And just one last observation on this. The Russia-China relationship is not at all like the Russia-North Korea relationship, which has now moved to a formal mutual defense military treaty. And of course, you have those North Korean troops who are fighting with the Russians in Kursk against invading Ukrainian forces. The China-Russia relationship is still primarily economic, energy trade based, and then, as we're seeing with Wang Yi's comments this week, also for China to kind of provide this general sense of support to Russia's positions in the world. I don't think that's going to be able to end overnight unless the US dangles an extremely lucrative offer in front of Moscow's eyes around sanctions release. But then even if the US ends its sanctions against Russia, the EU still has sanctions against Russia. So of course, the US, in its rapprochement with Russia, it cannot speak on behalf of the whole of the West and the whole of the G7.
All right. The US moving to break or wean Russia of Chinese support. Now, this is just before the US elections. Mr. Trump on television saying the one thing you never want to happen is you never want Russia and China uniting. I am going to have to ununite them, and I think I can do that. How much of what we're seeing, this rapprochement between Moscow and Washington, is driven by this need expressed explicitly just before the elections in November to ununite China from Russia?
I'm really pleased you picked up that word, ununite, because when you think about it, probably what the US might be able to achieve is to prevent the Russia-China relationship from deepening further. As I said, the steps that have not been taken between Russia and China is some sort of military pact. They don't have one of those. But I don't think, even if you stop it from deepening, you can necessarily totally unravel it. And that, I think, is, again, a reflection of how Donald Trump speaks, which is to present perhaps the grandest outcome, to purposefully use some degree of exaggeration, to set the direction of travel, to make his intentions completely unambiguous, which is certainly the case in how he communicates. But I don't think he would necessarily need them to become enemies to be able to claim some sort of victory in perhaps not allowing that Russia-China partnership to deepen. But as I say, just to very quickly repeat that point, because Russia and China are neighbours, how can you ununite neighbours? They clearly will want to. Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin have made all sorts of statements at BRICS summits. Russia has this Far East Economic Summit that it hosts in Vladivostok. It makes all of these grand proclamations about growing Russia-China bilateral trade. And I do suppose that if the Americans insert themselves into this equation, maybe the logic for Russia of growing that trade becomes a little bit less singularly compelling. But I think ununiting them, I can't necessarily see that happening.
Let's return to, what would China want out of this? And not just Wang Yi's address at the G20, but in his speech, which you mentioned at the Munich Security Conference, in which he said China will surely be a factor of certainty in this multipolar system. So, for example, a still point of the turning world, consistent with its measures on how to end that war in Ukraine. So out of this, how do you see China positioning itself, taking part in essentially what is now a war on the European front? A final question.
Yeah, this is probably the big picture point around these dramatic events of the last week, is if you'd have told Europeans 10 or 15 years ago that not only would there be North Korean troops fighting in the European conflict, but also the big superpower of Asia, China, having even an indirect role in how this conflict potentially might actually end, that would have been an alien concept. But it really shows just how much more of a multipolar world that we are, that the Chinese are potentially being spoken of as a possible guarantor on the Russian side for whatever deal comes about. So you can imagine the Ukrainians are given assurances by their staunch European partners like the United Kingdom, like France, like Poland and others, but that Russia has a sort of a guarantee around whatever peace deal or whatever end result to this conflict is found from the Chinese. And then the most dramatic manifestation of this is the still hypothetical possibility of some sort of Chinese peacekeeping presence. Just to be clear, there's no indication that would happen. But Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, has clearly said he doesn't want only NATO nation peacekeeping forces in whatever stabilization effort is required in the months and years ahead. Does that mean that there may be Asian troops that are involved, maybe on the Russian side of the front line? We have to wait and see, but it just shows how much the world has changed, even in the last 5 to 10 years, around this notion of a more multipolar world with many more centers of power and influence.
So more solidifying in what you have called the great global rebalancing. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Samir Puri, Director of the Center for Global Governance and Security at Chatham House. Relations between Japan and the regional grouping ASEAN are based on mutual development and prosperity. But some say a two-way exchange is lacking even after 50 years of relations and a comprehensive strategic partnership. CNN's Gianni Vavani sat down with the ambassador of Japan to ASEAN in an exclusive interview and started by asking whether ASEAN needs to increase its presence in Japan.
Yes, that's exactly one of the issues that Japan would like to act in a positive manner. So Japan and ASEAN have been proud of having become the trusted partners based on the 50 years of friendship and cooperation. The major pillar or the background of this trusted partners relationship is people-to-people exchange. But at the 50th year of our relationship is partnership to co-create a future with the next generation. That's Work Project 2.0. So that is we doubled the amount of a cultural and intellectual exchange program that 40 billion Japanese yen, It's equivalent to more than $250 million in the next 10 years. So with that, we are going to increase our culture exchange as well as intellectual exchange. One important thing is that more and more ASEAN academics will study in Japan as well as the vice versa. This is a two-way exchange.
Southeast Asia's dynamics is ever evolving, with competition intensifying between the US and China. In your view, is ASEAN a battleground?
Well, ASEAN has long managed any sort of big power rivalries for decades. And Japan has been always supporting ASEAN's maintaining peace and promoting prosperity. And one big initiative that ASEAN undertook to address this challenge of rivalry is ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific, AOIP, in 2019. And it was in the next year, in 2020, that Japan became the first country at the summit level to fully express full support to this AOIP. So this Indo-Pacific, which make this region, Indo-Pacific region, a place from the place of rivalry, the place of dialogue and cooperation. And Japan is fully supporting that initiative, and I believe that Japan can be instrumental in making that happen.
How then does Japan strike a balance in its role?
Japan is in a good position to address such a challenge. Maybe like ASEAN, Japan has a good relationship with key partners. Obviously, the US, for example, and the countries in the region, all ASEAN countries, and also in relation to China, we have, of course, challenges, and we are squarely facing those challenges. The relationship between China and Japan is characterized by mutually beneficial relationship based on a common strategic interest. We are working to promote a constructive and stable relationship. So I think Japan can be one of the major countries which can support ASEAN's efforts to enhance stability and peace and prosperity in this region.
ASEAN countries see China and its economy as crucial to their future. How concerned is Japan about China's potential dominance?
The key point is that the ASEAN maintaining the central position, ensuring, as I said, the rule-based international order, which is good for not only ASEAN, but also all the countries in this Indo-Pacific region. So as the key point is for all the countries to abide by international law. And if there are any activities which are against international law, persuading such countries and activities to be stopped or refrained from. So in that way, all the economic activities can benefit the entire region.
Coming upon East Asia tonight, Hong Kong's largest pro-democracy party takes a first step towards disbanding. And millions of undocumented Afghan refugees in Pakistan are expected in a mass repatriation in the latest flashpoint between the two neighbors. More trouble ahead for South Korea's impeached president. Police say they are building another case against Yoon Suk-yeol for obstructing arrest. An arrest warrant was issued for Mr. Yoon on the 31st of December in an investigation accusing him of insurrection committed over his imposition of martial law. For days, Mr. Yoon and his Presidential Security Service blocked investigators trying to enter his home and his office. The suspended leader was only arrested 2 weeks later. Police say they began investigating the obstruction case in the first week of January. The penalty for the crime of obstruction could go up to 5 years in jail. Mr. Yoon's lawyers say the arrest warrant was invalid because the probe into his martial law declaration was not properly conducted. He's also immune from prosecution pending the Constitutional Court ruling on his impeachment. Those impeachment hearings are being held at the same time as the criminal trial for insurrection. Hong Kong's Democratic Party has taken its first step towards dissolving amid a tightening political landscape and shifting policies. The party's leadership has set up a task force to study procedures for disbanding. A final decision will require approval from 75% of attending members at a General Assembly. The party currently has 400 members. Party chairperson Loh Kin Hei said the party does not face any acute financial burdens, adding that decision to dissolve was based on the current political situation. Founded in 1994, the Democratic Party was Hong Kong's largest pro-democracy group, shaping debates and even maintaining dialogue with Beijing. Its former members also became top government officials. But the political climate in the city changed drastically after the 2019 protests. Beijing's imposition of the national security law in 2020 triggered the arrest of activists and the closure of many civil society groups. While the Democratic Party's influence has dwindled following electoral reforms, including rules ensuring that only, quote, patriots can run for office. Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto giving #1 priority to food security for his term in office. His administration aims to achieve self-sufficiency in staples such as rice by 2027. And that's a year earlier than the initial target. But as Saiful Bari Ismail finds out, sustaining that effort could prove difficult.
It's harvest time, the most anticipated occasion for rice farmers at Pasuruan Regency, East Java Province. Farmers harvest their crop 3 times a year and they are able to receive at least 6,500 rupiah or 4 cents per kilogram of grain.
Kalau musim hujan itu hasilnya sedikit. Kalau kemarau panjang itu hasilnya banyak. 1 hektar 8 ton. Kalau musim hujan ini 6 ton.
East Java is known as the national food barn and the province has been the largest rice producer since 2020.
East Java, being one of Indonesia's key agricultural provinces, has a substantial area dedicated to paddy fields. The province has more than 1.6 million hectares of paddy fields with a total production of over 9.2 million tons in 2024.
East Java contributes about 17% to the total rice production nationwide. In an exclusive interview with CNA, the recently re-elected East Java governor said the province can serve as a model in efforts to achieve food security in the country.
Bagaimana kemudian produksi per hektar itu bisa naik? Kalau ini produksinya udah bagus, bagaimana kemudian pupuk ini kita konversi dengan pupuk organik? Mungkin semula 50-50, setelah itu 80% organik, setelah itu 100% organik. Sehingga bukan hanya produksinya banyak, tapi juga sehat.
East Java aims to increase rice production through land intensification, such as fertilizer management and mechanization, as it has limited land that can be converted for agriculture.
Kalau kita ingin mencapai swasembada pangan secepat-cepatnya, semua hal harus ditempuh. Lahan-lahan yang dulu tidur harus dimanfaatkan. Untuk Jawa Timur ada target 2.930 hektar. Itu yang akan ditambah.
National food security begins with self-sufficiency efforts at the village level. In Burno Village, a national social forestry pilot project began in 2021, where the local community is allowed to use forest areas for agriculture, including rice cultivation.
Namanya aja Burno, tanahnya subur, tandurannya ono, tanamannya ada. Jadi semua tanaman ada di sana. Ini seumpama negara, kalau seandainya ini diblokade, dia sudah bertahan untuk terkait dengan makanan tersebut.
Indonesia may be able to stop importing rice this year because it has enough stock to meet demand. But its bid to stop importing rice may be unsustainable due to its aging farmer population and lack of young successors.
Pemuda sekarang itu rata-rata senang ke kantoran, ke pabrik. Karena kita di Pasuruan sendiri lingkungannya pabrik. Jadi agak berat, petani ini lebih penting. Meskipun kamu punya uang, kalau nggak ada pangan, itu masalah nantinya.
Agriculture experts are also skeptical about Indonesia's rushed food self-sufficiency plans, emphasizing that it requires a long-term approach.
Sayangnya juga sampai hari ini kita belum bisa melihat ya, menemukan gitu atau mendengar, membaca gitu ya dokumen yang rancang bangun skenario atau roadmap-nya yang disiapkan oleh pemerintah gitu. Kalau kemudian program dan kebijakan yang dibuat itu hanya sekedar gitu ya untuk memenuhi janji-janji politik, bagi saya itu sesuatu yang sangat menyedihkan gitu. Karena pertaruhannya ada di soal bangsa ini.
President Prabowo Subianto's recent budget cuts are set to slash funding for critical infrastructure projects, including irrigation systems, vital for boosting agricultural production. Farming experts said this move, combined with the challenges posed by climate change, may be the last straw that breaks Indonesia's hopes for food self-sufficiency and food security. Saiful Bahri Ismail, CNA, Pasuruan, Indonesia.
Pakistan is carrying out a mass repatriation drive with millions of Afghans likely to be expelled from the country over the next few months. This comes as Pakistani authorities accuse neighboring Afghanistan of harboring the banned militant group TTP, held responsible for a spate of terror attacks in its country, a claim that Kabul denies. Our correspondent Hira Mustafa with this report.
In recent days, authorities in Pakistan have intensified a crackdown on Afghan citizens in the capital Islamabad and the neighbouring city of Rawalpindi. This is a move that the Afghan embassy in Islamabad has criticised, calling it an attempt to forcefully expel all Afghan refugees from the country while subjecting them to mistreatment through arrests and searches without any notice. This claim by Kabul's mission was rejected by Pakistan's Foreign Office. It claims Islamabad efforts are focused on creating conditions conducive to the swift return of illegal Afghan residents to their home country. Islamabad has long threatened to expel Afghans residing in the country without legal authorization. But Kabul claims the current crackdown will see Pakistan deport all Afghan nationals in the near future. Last month, Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif approved March 31st as a deadline for the expulsion of those Afghans still awaiting relocation to other countries. Sources in Pakistan's Foreign Office have told CNA that Islamabad is not only deporting undocumented Afghan refugees, but also cracking down on foreigners illegally settled in the country with an eye on security concerns.
There has to be a negotiated, settled issue. These are our brothers and sisters who have lived here for 40 years. There's a lot of goodwill between the two countries. So I think there has to be a middle way, which government of Pakistan also needs to look into.
Since the Taliban's return to power in Afghanistan in 2021, over 500,000 Afghans have sought refuge in Pakistan. And according to a United Nations agency that monitors migration, over 800,000 Afghan nationals have been expelled from Pakistan in the last 2 years. The government alleges a majority of them are living without legal documentation, with thousands hoping to be resettled elsewhere, including the United States.
It's been 3 years that government of Pakistan is also demanding these respective Western governments as well to take these Afghans back. But now we have Donald Trump in the United States of America, and he has even closed the program for which these resettlement are taking place.
Afghan refugees in Islamabad say they are living in constant fear of being expelled. Many say they won't be able to rebuild their lives from scratch again. Their expulsion has also drawn international condemnation, with human rights organizations like Amnesty International calling the move a violation of international human rights law. Hira Mustafa, CNA, Islamabad.
And that's East Asia Tonight. Don't forget headlines anytime at cna.asia, plus we're on Facebook and YouTube.